Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll be discussing about the multi-availability zone based deployments in RDS. Now multi-AZ based deployments in RDS not only gives you a enhanced availability but also better durability, which makes it a natural fit for the production database workloads. Now typically in any organization that you will take, if they are running their production database in RDS, they would have a multi-AZ based deployment model there. Now, basically, in order to understand how multi-AZ based deployment works, let's look into this specific animation. Where let's assume that there is a primary DB over here. So this is the master database. Now, what happens in multi-AZ is that AWS RDS will create one more database in a different availability zone. So let's assume that the master DB is in availability zone AZ1. There'll also be one more database which will be created in a different availability zone, and there will be a synchronous replication which will be happening between AZ1 and the AZ2 database. So this is referred as the primary database and this is referred as the standby database. Now, what happens is that if the primary database goes down, Amazon RDS will automatically switch to the standby database. Now, once it automatically switches to the standby database, you don't really have to change the endpoint of the DB. The endpoint will remain the same even after the switch happens. So let me quickly show you. So if you have a database, generally it has this endpoint. Now let's assume that this endpoint is associated with our database in AZ1. Now if this database is unreachable or there are some issues related to hardware or any other things, then RDS will automatically switch over to the standby database in AZ2, and after the switch the endpoint remains the same. So you don't really have to update your application's config to point to the standby database. So this is one great thing about the multi-AZ based deployment model. So let's look into how exactly we can do that. So if I go to the databases, let's start from scratch. Let me create a database. Will be based on MySQL. Let's do a next. Now there are three use cases. So this is very simple to understand. So one is dev test based MySQL. So this dev test based MySQL will not really have a multi-availability zone. It will not have provisioned IOPS, etc. It's just for testing. Then you have a production. So if you see in production, you have the multi-AZ deployment feature. You also have provisioned IOPS, and they also have production based on Amazon Aurora. So let's select dev test for the time being. I'll do a next. And if you go a bit down, if you see under the multi-AZ deployment, the option is no. That means this is not a multi-AZ based deployment. And if you go down, the estimated monthly cost is 14 USD only. Now, if you create the multi-AZ based deployment, if I enable this, the cost doubles up. So earlier it was 14, now it's 29. Now the reason why cost directly doubles up, because there is a standby database which is running. So this is the reason why you have the double the cost compared to the single AZ based deployment. Now once you have done that, let's go to the DB instance identifier. I'll say as kplabs-multi-AZ. The master username we can give it as kp admin, and let's quickly give the password here. Once you have done that, let's click on next. So we'll leave all of these as the default configuration, and we can go ahead and we can do a create database. Now one important part to remember is that it says that your database instance is created. However, under the usage charges, if you see over here, it says that the following selection disqualify the instance from being eligible for free tier. So under free tier, the multi-AZ deployment is not part of, so you will be charged for it. So that's all right for the demo, but if you're trying it out, you can do it, but make sure that you delete your database after you do the practical. So we can click on view DB instance details, and this database is being created. So if I go back to the database, the kplabs-multi-AZ status is still being created. So let's quickly wait for a moment and we'll resume the video in a minute. So the status of our kplabs multi-AZ is changed to backing up. So it took around 10 to 15 minutes for this status to come, and post which we'll have the available status. So in the meantime, let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and understand more about the multi-AZ based deployment model. Now we were discussing that if any kind of failure that might happen to the instance, which is this is a primary DB, then RDS will automatically fail over to the standby DB. So it is important for us to remember on what are the failover conditions where this switch can happen. Now this failover conditions are listed over here. The first is during the loss of availability in the primary availability zone. Second is loss of network connectivity, basically to the primary DB. Then is compute unit failure on the primary DB. And fourth is storage failure on the primary. Now, based on these conditions, it's important to remember that RDS automatically detects these and it will automatically recover from most common failure by switching to the standby. So as soon as RDS detects that there is some issue with the underlying host, for example, it will automatically do the switch. So administrator or a manual intervention is not required. RDS will do it for you. Now, one important part to remember is that when this switch happens, you will see for some amount of time, latencies will spike up. But again, it is for a small amount of time only. And if it happens quite a lot, like I have been working in organizations, we have 5,000 servers and we have a lot of databases, and this automatic switching happens quite a lot. So it's not like if you just have a single primary DB, it will just work flawlessly. A lot of time the failover condition happens. So let's do one thing. Let's go back to the RDS console, and it seems that our database is available. Now we were already discussing that there were multiple conditions based on which the failover would happen. Now whenever RDS would fail, it would typically give the information about that failover within the event notifications over here. So within this events, you will typically see if the failover has happened. So one quick way in order to have that failover happen forcefully is to restart. So we'll click on the RDS, and from the actions, we'll do a reboot. So here you have an option says reboot with failover, and we'll go ahead and we'll do a reboot. So let me quickly refresh the page now. It has been 2 minutes. I generally pause the video during that amount of time. So now if you see, the info is now available. So that means the failover would have happened. Now if you click on events here, you would typically see that there is one event. There should be one event related to failover. So here it says that the multi-AZ instance failover has started, and the last message is the multi-AZ instance failover completed. So if in case you want to see whether the failover had happened, because many times what happens is that since the endpoint does not change at the middle of the night, suddenly for some amount of time the latencies has increased and there are certain connection errors. And if you want to see whether it is a application side issue or a networking issue, or it's the issue related to DB by itself, because it might happen that the failover is happening. So you can quickly look into the events here and verify whether the failover had happened or not. Now you can also automate it in terms of whether the failover happens. You would like to receive an email. So that can be done with the help of event subscriptions. So if you click on event subscription, you can basically give a event subscription name. You can give a new SMS topic. You can give a ARN or even the new email topic. Now if you look into the source down, let me select instances, and I can specify a DB instance, or I can specify a wildcard saying all instances. Let me do all instances, And within event category to include, either you can have all event categories or a specific event categories. So if I click on specific event categories, within here, you have multiple categories over here. So one of the interesting one would be the failover one, because this is one of the times where you will have certain errors within your application. So anytime failover happens or anytime maybe failure happens, you would like to receive a SMS or you would like to receive an email, then the event subscription is something that will help you there. So with this said, let's look into some of the important pointers for exam. Now we already know that in case of any infrastructure failure, RDS will automatically perform the failover to the standby instance. Now, since the endpoint remains the same after failover, we do not really need to modify anything within the code. Now, multi-AZ based deployment is supported for MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL as well as Oracle. And one very important part to remember is that multi-AZ is based on synchronous replication, while read replica is based on asynchronous replication. Many times in exams, you might get quizzed based on this. So when it comes to asynchronous replication, what really happens is, we already discussed that whatever application write might happen, it happens to the primary DB, and then after it has been committed to the primary DB, then the changes would be replicated to various slaves or various read replica. Now from the read replica, you can do a backup, you can do a ETL or various others. Alright, so this is asynchronous replication over here. The write will first be committed to the master, then it will go to the slave. So depending upon the network over here or depending upon the hardware resources, there would be a replication lag. So it's not like you will have a millisecond based updates. There'll always be that replication lag that might happen. Now, coming to the topic of synchronous versus asynchronous replication, since multi-AZ uses synchronous replication, what happens here is that write is not committed unless and until it is written on both the replicas. Now both the replicas means the standby instance as well as the primary instance. So whenever a write happens, it happens to both of them and then it is committed. So next thing is, since it is a synchronous replication, you have the higher durability. You might also have the higher transaction latency over here. Now when it comes to asynchronous replication, since writes are not happening in real time across both the master and read replica, it might happen that your read replica might fall behind the master and that can be determined with the help of replication lag. So that's about it for the multi-AZ based deployments in RDS. I hope this video has been informative for you and I look forward to see you in the next video.